Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing, it's precision crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Me and Paranormal You. This is your buddy, Ryan Singer. I am very excited today because we've got Lisa Campion on the show, author, Reiki Master, psychic, and it turns out OG paranormal investigator. We are gonna knock the dust off some of the old paranormal investigation, because doing this in the 90s, before, I like to make the joke that, you know, sometimes it feels like paranormal investigations have turned into like the Monster energy drink can of with just like the graphics and the fluorescent coloring. But I say that lovingly, of course, but an author, 4 books, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Lisa? Thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on your show.
There's a lot of really good stuff to get into. I mean, you've basically been doing psychic work since you were a teenager, right?
Yeah, I started working as a psychic when I was 19, which
that's
is
bonkers.
By the way, it was in the 80s, and I don't know why I did. It's just that you think you can do stuff when you're 19, so you just do it.
Well, I'm so glad that happened, because, you know, there really is nothing to do. There's nothing to it but to do it when it comes to this kind of work, especially in the 80s when it's even more kooky back then, right?
Totally kooky. And, you know, I was born in the 60s, so I grew up in just outside of Boston in a super haunted, one of those big old mama Victorian houses that looks like it should be like they should make a horror movie out of it.
Oh my God.
That's like where I grew up. And then I was born psychic. So just always seeing things other people didn't, knowing things, feeling things, sensing things, all the full package. I got the full package, including seeing what I called the gray people. And, you know, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and the gray people would be there. And I'd tell my mom about it in the morning. And my parents were hippies. Like, I was lucky. They didn't like drag me to the church and throw holy water on me like happens to some people. But they were like, "Oh, your imagination, Lisa. Like, where do you come up with these things?" And I was like the little kid on, you know, in the Sixth Sense movie. So I was like, but I wasn't as scared. I just was trying to figure out what the heck was going on and what to do about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I wonder too, with a lot of things in life, if we don't emulate fear that we see in other people when it comes to encountering certain things. And because you say something interesting, that you weren't scared.
No.
And, you know, but if you experience these things you know, when you originally experience something, and especially when you're a kid, and if you learn from other people who are scared about it or scared of it, I wonder if we also be like, "Oh, I'm supposed to be scared of this. I'll be scared now."
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean, I've always been way more scared of living people. Living people scare the heck out of me on a regular basis. Like, I know where the real danger is, you know? And like spirits, I just knew, even the gray people, I knew they were insubstantial. Like they didn't have a physicality that could hurt me. They were sad. They were, you know, they were the ghosts. They were sort of my first encounter with ghosts. And I just knew they needed help. And even though I was really little, I started, you know, what I call ghost therapy, which is if I listened and heard them, they would sometimes just go away. Like they would feel better and then they would leave, you know? And I just knew they were incomplete. I mean, sometimes it was freaky because they would have like what I call the dead face, you know, so it looks sort of corpsey. And that was, you know, but that's when they're stuck in their death state, they can come across looking like that. That's kind of like, oh my, but they're like in shock. They're like, "Oh my God, look what happened to me. Like, look at this." Like, oh, you know, like the guy who was in a motorcycle accident, you know, but he was just in this, he didn't look too good. But he was and I just like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry that happened to you." And he's like, "Can I tell you all about it?" You know? And the way that I would, even when I was little, the way I would perceive it would be like a mash of feelings and visual and hearing and sensing and knowing, like if you're in a, sensory surround sound kind of experience, right? And I just knew if I hung with it and sort of held his hand along the way, he would be able to process that and then move along a little bit, So that wasn't, and I have seen some dark things, especially when I was doing the house clearings. There were a few times I was a bit afraid, but more annoyed than, like you don't want them to follow you home. That's quite irritating.
Well, I mean, you touch on a very important point, I think, that I've never really considered, at least I can't remember considering it. And that's, how they say we die as we live. Oftentimes I've heard that phrase. And
yeah,
it seems what you're explaining here is even in the afterlife or the in-between or the spirit realm or whatever we want to call it, we want connection and we want community. We want to be heard. We want to be seen. And to me, that sounds just like what it feels like to be alive.
Exactly. And I don't, there really isn't much difference between a living person and a dead person. It's sort of like, what's the difference between water and an ice cube? They're like in a different state. They're in a different form, but it's essentially the same principle. And that's why I have a little beef with paranormal tourism and, sort of people cashing in on the tragic stories of ghosts, and they're not zoo animals. They're fellow human beings that, really need our help. And that's what I learned, if I could help them, then they would move along. So to me, they were just people. They were just a different form of people.
Now, did you ever find that some spirits or some people kind of like they want to keep hanging out and they're not in like a tragic state of despair necessarily, but they're just like, I enjoy hanging out here for now and I'll move on later. Is that something you've ever encountered?
Yeah, for sure. Nothing's more stubborn than a stuck dead person who doesn't want to leave. You know what I mean? I mean, we're stubborn as humans. And I think if you were a jerk in life, you might be a jerky ghost.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like
that tracks probably, right?
That's kind of how that goes. And I see what our beliefs are about death and dying have a lot to do with how we transition, So I live in New England and there are a lot of Catholics here. And even though I didn't grow up Catholic, my parents were Unitarians. When I was doing house clearings, I carried around like Catholic liturgy, like carried around like the last rites, because if you believed, Ryan, you were going to hell for eternity because maybe you were a little naughty in your life, would you go? Or would you do your darndest to stay here and not end up in hell if you really thought you were going there?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I was raised Catholic the whole 12 years of school and everything. And, and I suppose it's like, you don't even want to go to purgatory, let alone hell, I suppose. But yeah, that's fascinating. Now you said you were doing investigations even when you were back in like 92, and that you learned a lot of lessons the hard way. And there is a lot to be said for that, because I think it's one of those you burn, you learn, hand on the stove type things for, I think, almost all of us, unfortunately. But I think there are a lot of things that you can do to prepare yourself better than just kind of going all in. But I mean, many of us in this world are just kind of like, let's do it. Right.
I mean, I was always such on the cutting edge of these things. Like there was no script for it, when I was doing it, and I just did it because it's what was in front of me, and I in the 90s, I had a friend who was a realtor, and I was living in Massachusetts, and she couldn't sell this gorgeous house in this sort of affluent, Massachusetts neighborhood. And she's like, people move out after a year, it's on, like, she's like, the last people who lived here for like literally 2 months and then put it back on the market. Now it's been sitting empty. She's like, maybe it's haunted. Will you come over and see? I was the only psychic she knew, and I was like, well, sure, yeah, I can do that. I had absolutely zero idea about what I was getting myself into. And there was some stuff. There was definitely some residual energy in there, and a pretty nasty spirit who didn't want to leave. And it took me a while, but eventually I got that spirit to go. And then all of a sudden that house, it had a whole different vibe. People bought it, people stayed. It was a whole different thing. And honestly, like the name got around this little group of realtors, right? So they kind of were sending me their like problematic, properties. And that's how I got started with it.
That's really funny. What's the name of the person who comes? I've never bought a house, but there's a person who comes out and does like the
building inspector,
the
right?
building inspector. Oh my God. So you're like the spirit inspector in your county.
Yeah. The worst one I ever did, actually, what was a failure for me, was the old rectory in a Catholic, like where the priests lived in the Catholic church.
Oh yeah.
And then later on, this guy would not leave, and he was creepy. He would come up through the mirrors and sort of he liked to look at people in the shower.
Ugh.
And a family that the diocese was renting it out, and this family was living there with like teenage girls. And later on down the road, like all this, news broke about the abuse that was going on. He was an abusive guy, an abuser, and kind of a perv, and he wouldn't leave. Like because he thought he was going to go to hell. He was sure he was going to go to hell, and that was the one I couldn't get rid of. He's probably still there. There was no shift in that one.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you don't feel, to me, there's no place I feel more vulnerable than the activities that one might do in the bathroom, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's shower or using the bathroom. To me, that's like one of my big fears is I'll be using the bathroom, and that's when the big earthquake happens in Los Angeles. And I'm just like, oh, I'm literally caught with my pants around my ankles. But the shower is also one of the most vulnerable spaces too. So that's extra creepy on top of that. To feel like because what can you do there? The rectory, I had to, I was an altar boy and all that kind of stuff. And so like the nuns had their, their convent or whatever it was called. And then the priests had their rectory house. And as a kid, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool that they don't have to pay rent. Right. I mean, that was like the one cool thing I thought about. I was like, oh, it'd be nice to be able to walk to work that quick. But then the more I got older, I was like, no, I don't want to live that close to work because then they can get me whenever they need me. But it was always to me, it was always like a really heavy energy. And it ended up being a guy, at my school and my church who was like that. He was one of those abusers and the pervs too. But there's just so much energy there too. And it can go real dark in those kinds.
I have a theory about why it's always bathrooms. And it really is always bathrooms. I wrote a blog once called, the ghosts of Target restrooms. When I encountered a really spirited in the Target restroom, the ladies' room at Target. And I think bathrooms, first of all, a lot happens in bathrooms, public bathrooms. When I went and asked what happened in the bathroom in Target, they were like, oh, people overdose in there all the time. In fact, the staff carried Narcan because there were so many overdose in the Target bathroom. But also, I feel like the plumbing and the electrical, like it's really hard for ghosts to pass through running water. And sometimes the way bathrooms are wired and have all the plumbing run, they can wander in, but it's hard for them to find their way out. Right. And then when we take a shower, we shift into this brainwave state where we're super relaxed, the alpha brainwave. It's the same we get as we're falling asleep and as we're waking up. Why so many people have paranormal experiences as they're shifting in and out of that sleep state. We're in that same alpha brainwave state in the shower. So I think if you combine those two things, like you are in a state where you're the most psychic and you're in a place where a lot of spirits get stuck, haunted bathrooms, it's a thing.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. And I know someone out there is probably having the idea like, oh, I should do readings while I'm in the shower. Well, yeah, but put a bathing suit on, you know what I mean? Like, don't be weird about it. But yeah, that's interesting. Well, I know my mom does. My mom's a big Wim Hof person.
Mm-hmm.
And so my guess is that if you're doing a cold shower, you might not get into that alpha state quite as easily, potentially. But so if you're worried, if you're having problems, would you say if you're having problems in the bathroom, especially like when you're taking a shower or a bath, maybe do cold water, and that might at least get you out of that super psychic state that you might fall into where the connectivity happens?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, there's lots of advantages to cold showers, but I would say just get in there and clear your bathroom, like let's solve the problem at the core. And, there's sort of like a general like DIY ghost removal technique that I think works for a lot of people. And that's really to kind of exert our will. And I always say, like, bring your breath and your power to your solar plexus, use your bad dog voice, like where you really mean it. And then, in the name of a higher power. So that's sort of like the spiritual version of calling the cops. So, and then whatever deity of your choice, Archangel Michael, Jesus, Buddha, Allah, doesn't really matter, whatever you believe, in the name of that deity, I command that you leave. And that's a pretty powerful process. You have to really mean it though. Like, what would you do if an actual person burst into your shower, while you were in there? That you do the same kind of thing. And, and then the calling in the higher power, sort of the spiritual equivalent of calling the cops. We're going to let them do the wrestle, but there's many things you can do. You can have your house, property blessed by a priest or a rabbi or, a feng shui practitioner. There's a lot we can do to cleanse the space that we live in. And I think it's if you're having a problem with that, there are solutions.
Yeah. Well, that's good advice. I mean, cause I'm living in the modern Western medical system world where no, we don't solve the problem. We treat the symptoms. But this is good because we're getting to the core of the problem, treat the actual problem, not the symptoms of the problem. And that's a great way to approach it when also dealing with, spiritual maladies such as, especially unwanted hauntings. I mean, I have many friends who are like, oh no, we have a ghost and, it's pretty cool and it's chill and we think it likes being here. It doesn't bother us and we get along. And I guess there is something to be said for that. But it depends on the person and obviously it depends on, the ghost, who that person used to be as well. Or especially if it's, we definitely got to be calling 911, spiritual 911 when it's not a person, when it's an entity of some kind or a dark energy. For sure. But
we know that, Ryan, like we feel it, like we all have that power of discernment. We do it with other humans all the time. And, that study, it's like within like 9 seconds, I think they researched it. Whether that person feels good, neutral, or bad to you if you meet somebody new, right? And it's the same. We have the same power of discernment with spiritual things. So if something wakes you up in the middle of the night and you're going to be startled, like we're always like, oh my gosh, what's that? And then if you wait until kind of the startling feeling is over, you can tune in to, does it feel good? Does it feel neutral? Does it feel bad? And that, I think we decide what to do from that vantage point.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. I wasn't aware of the 9 second. Yeah, that's really, now I'm like looking back throughout my life. I'm like, oh yeah, that definitely tracks. You kind of like, oh, I just liked him right immediately when I met him, or, oh, I just had a bad feeling. Or I just knew that we weren't a good fit. And sometimes I will be honest, sometimes I come in hot. You know what I mean? I'm too juiced up. I've had too many coffees. I'll come in hot sometimes. And I can tell I'm like, oh, I'm being a lot for you. I apologize. And this isn't a good time.
But some people really like that. Some people, that's really going to work for some people. And, I don't know. It's like, that's a resonance thing. And, just keep doing you. That's what I think about that. But, we all feel that. And that is actually a form of intuition that, they, like the psychologists say, oh, we're reading people's micro expressions. And I don't know, that might be true, but I chalk it up to our natural intuitive sense, which every human has, where we're just kind of reading the energy of the room and we're trying to figure out whether we're resonating, literally vibrating in harmony with another person or another being. And we know when it's creepy. We know when it doesn't feel good. We just need to trust that and then understand what to do, what steps to take to clear that up.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it is. Now, whether they want to explain it, and to me, trusting your intuition and recognizing, especially something like micro expressions, They don't have to be different.
Right.
I mean, just by sheer definition of the word, micro expression, things that are not overt or obvious or something that we're aware of, in our, most immediate consciousness, we are processing and we understand and, knowing something. And to me, that's intuition. And I think it's, oh gosh, I'm going to screw this up, but it's because we're Homo sapien, I believe, is the name of the modern human creature, right? And it's in sapien that I believe is from the root word of intuitive.
Interesting.
Is I believe, if I'm not, because it kind of comes from sapience and intuition and just the knowing. And I mean, it's part of who we are as a creature, and we've kind of separated ourselves from that. But I think for the last 10 years especially, we're all coming back to it. But we got Lisa Campion here. We're going to take a quick break, try to keep the lights on if we can, or the candles lit on an episode like this. So we're going to do that. We're going to come back, and I want to talk about energy healing for empaths, and maybe some of your other books, and then maybe get into some specific things about the overall topics we're talking about here when it comes to maybe protecting yourself and things like that. So we're going to be right back after this short break. All right, I've got Lisa Campion here, author, Reiki Master, psychic. Oh gosh, you got 4 books out there. It is no small feat to write a single book, and I think most people understand that, right? But to have, a stable of books that you've written, to me is quite impressive, and I think to most people, in fact, and especially about the topics that I find truly fascinating. I want to focus on the energy healing for empaths one, because I think a lot of people who listen to this show relate directly to that, and they understand that they're tapped into being an empath and understanding that, whether it's psychic vampires, which I know we can cover all the books, I guess, to some degree, but to me, that's really fascinating. And when it comes to the heart of energy healing for empaths, there has to be just, there's probably some fundamentals, right, that are key and specific to keeping your psychic and spiritual and energetic balance in this life, because there's so much coming at us.
So much. And I love helping out my fellow sensitives. And like when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing. It wasn't like a topic, or there wasn't a word to it, And I feel like people are becoming more and more sensitive. Like every new generation that comes in, there's more sensitives. So I love this topic, and I love what you said about the fundamentals. And for me, it's about energy management or psychic hygiene. Every sensitive person, or every person that, whether you're an empath or you're going through a spiritual or psychic opening, I always start with, let's teach you how to manage your energy. Let's teach you how to ground yourself, how to clear the energy that doesn't belong to you, and how to protect yourself, which is really about boundaries, setting better boundaries, energetic boundaries, and all kinds of other boundaries. Because that is the difference between, I'm on my couch and I can't get off my couch. All I can do is hang out with my cat and watch Netflix, to I'm out and about in the world fulfilling my purpose in life, And it's really, that's the process I went through. And that's the empowerment process that I see a lot of empaths discover when they learn how to manage their energy.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I can immediately recognize certain times in my life where I'm just like, ooh. I mean, during the, my day job, quote unquote day job, is out performing stand-up comedy and, traveling around, constantly meeting new people, which is something I really love. And, at the end of the night, I am super juiced up, and, I've got all this energy and I can't fall asleep. So I'm usually up quite late. But then by the time I wake up, oftentimes I'm like, I might just be in the hotel bed until showtime, the next day, because I didn't bubble up, is what I call it, or I didn't do a good job of psychic hygiene, like you're talking about. Now, if someone wants like they're in a spot and they realize, oh shoot, I need to do a quick, what we call like, trucker showers in a bathroom where it's just real quick, like, like they're in a spot where they need to get re-energized a little bit or do a better thing. Do you have any things that you do that are like real quick, like snacks?
Yeah. I have one. And I also, before I tell you that, I also want to say, I think performers have a really interesting, like complication with this too, because what I notice about performers is that I noticed this when I went to a Sarah McLaughlin concert.
Oh, I love her.
Oh my God, me too.
Much.
And she felt like she was singing to me. She felt like she was standing next to me. And what I realized in that moment is that she opened her energy field and spread her energy field through the entire theater that we were in. And it was not a small place. And I'm like, we all felt that way. We all felt like we're besties with Taylor Swift, or, that we're in Dave Matthews' head. And I think about like how many people, like as a performer, your charisma, your ability to capture people is based on how well you do that. I mean, also how good you are, your skill is, but
at the functional part of it.
Yeah, the functional part, but also like people will feel you if you do that. So you will spend the night with all those people literally in your energy field, which is energizing. That's like what feeds you and, like what you were saying, but that's probably why you feel a little bit like, wrung out the next day, and I would say, make sure that you do like really thorough cleansing afterwards, like do your clearing practices so you really can hold on to the beautiful vibe of that, but you're not holding on to everybody's sticky energy.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, sometimes what I'll try to do is, it's funny you said that opened up the energy field. I try to encompass the whole venue in a bubble. I just expand my bubble out to the whole place, so we're all inside of it.
That's right. And you want to then retract it back so that you just are in you, and that anything you picked up, you got to let it go. Now my truck stop, that's a great analogy, because mine is about washing my hands. And because we can always excuse ourselves, go to the restroom, you get a little peace and quiet in the restroom, take a few breaths. Like I use a breathing and visualization. So I imagine standing under a waterfall of light, and I pair that with putting my hands in the water, soap and water, and like with this water, with the soap, I wash away all the energy that doesn't belong to me. And, any energy that is mine that I'm ready to let go of. And I also imagine that sort of this divine waterfall of light all like going through me. And then sort of zip back up my energy field or go back into my bubble. You can do it anywhere. You can do it in the middle of Costco. You can do it at family Thanksgiving. You can do it in an airport, in an airplane, anywhere. And to me, that's my truck stop go-to process.
Okay. Yeah. And that seems, like you said, you can practically do that anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good to know. And, when you're living the life that you're living, when, I don't know, obviously your daily routine, but I'm guessing you're doing a lot of readings. You're talking to people probably like me all the time. So you're of service. You're also putting yourself out there. How many podcasts do you have? I'm joking, but it looks like 17. Like, I mean, you've got the Reiki healing, you've got the Reiki lifestyle podcast, the Quantum Mystic podcast. You do online classes. You're an instructor, a teacher, a healer, a reader. So you have to have a pretty vigilant routine when it comes to maintaining your spiritual hygiene, I imagine.
Yeah, it's so true. And I spend a lot of time in the morning sort of sorting myself out. And I meditate, I journal, I do my own energetic hygiene ritual like ground, clear, protect. And I work hard to sort of get myself into like, a high vibration state. And sometimes it takes 10 minutes, sometimes it takes an hour and a half. And I just give myself plenty of like, I'm not rushing that process. When I get there, my whole day goes well. I love everything I do. I'm full of energy. And then in between things, I do my little restroom, or I breathe, I go outside. I like to garden. When I'm sort of one of those extrovert introvert types. So when I'm in my own kind of space, I'm kind of introverted. I just do like, I love grandma activities like, you know, knitting and walking my dog and gardening. Kind of dorky grandma stuff, but it's really good for me. So that's what I do. And then I do another one before I go to bed. If I'm doing sessions, I do it in between sessions. If I bubble up before I go in, those big box stores really kill me. So if I have to do any of that stuff, I bubble up. Airplanes are hard for me too. And I'm just very diligent about that. I don't really forget about it or slack, or I feel terrible. I feel sick. I don't feel well and I can't function.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, there's got to be that aspect to it. And I think when people are kind of, when people are tapped into their psychic abilities and it's not necessarily on purpose, and they're kind of just walking around, they're like a free range chicken out there, just kind of going around being psychic. And it's got to be, it's got to be exhausting. And, in the energy healing book, you talk about, like protecting yourself from psychic vampires. Cause I think psychic vampires, they can almost like mosquitoes can smell blood types. I'm 100%. Pretty sure.
They're targeting you. They're sniffing you out and going for you because you look like a nice, juicy free lunch.
Yeah. And so when it comes to building those boundaries against people like that, and I'm not saying that there's people sitting at home just being like, who can I psychic vampire today? I mean, they might not even, some of them, be aware that they're doing it.
Most don't. Most aren't aware. Yeah.
So is there, I'm guessing that it might be similar to what we're already talking about, but when it comes to, putting up boundaries, and which you touched on and spoke about, is what like some good tips for people for specifically to protect against that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a muscle. So when we start working it, a boundary, and I love the energetic boundary, the bubble, which is really literally the outside edge of your energy field. And I noticed, because I do a lot of energy work on people, I noticed that empaths had like a spongy outside edge, and non-empathic people had a solid one. And I was like, well, that's why your non-empathic friends can just like move. They're like a tank. They can move through life, and they're like, that was fun. They can go through something that would kill me, and they're like, that was a good time. Let's do that again, And I'm like, oh my God, no, like that, And so we, as empaths and sensitives, if we do the daily energy management practice, visualizing that bubble as something more solid than a sponge, it over time, like just like going to the gym, over time, we build up bigger energetic boundaries. And I love to start with that because I feel like it gives us a leg to stand on, where we then have to do the harder thing, which is really, boundaries are really all about feeling when you're a yes and when you're a no. And then finding a lot of really nice ways to say no. And then practicing that over and over and over again, notice who hooks your energy, and then start saying no. Like I almost never say, I know I can't say yes in the moment. If you ask me something and I'm like, oh yeah, of course I'm going to do that for you, I'm going to say yes in the moment. So my go-to thing is like, let me get back to you tomorrow. And I have to like literally be alone in a room with my calendar to feel like, do I really want to do that? Like, is this, actually okay with me? And I just have learned to automatically say, I'll get back to you later. So I don't, or we can use our technology. Technology can be a massive energy drain or a really great ally in this, by the way. So, you can just suck your energy out in, doom scrolling, or you can, never answer your phone and let everything go to voicemail and set up notifications. Like you can use it to create a boundary or barrier between you. And I think one of the coolest techniques that I learned at Qigong Master taught me this is it's called the energy closed position. And what you do is you don't look in somebody's eye, because looking in their eye creates, when we eye gaze with somebody, creates an automatic energetic connection. So look at their eyebrow, look at the bridge of their nose. It looks like you're looking, but you're not. And then you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, which sort of closes up our energetic circuits. And you hold your feet and your knees and your hands together. And then like you don't answer them, you just go, I'm thinking of Yoda right now. And it's kind of like, it doesn't give them an angle in on you energetically, where if we're eye gazing or we have a very open body posture, people can like really form energy cords with us quite easily. So and you'll know you're around somebody like that when you feel like you've got to cover your solar plexus with your arms. So when you cross your arms over your belly, that is your intuition telling you someone's trying to hook you.
Interesting. Now I'm going to be watching people I'm talking to if they close their arms around me. No, it's like one of these things too, where if you're out if you're running around, right, and life gets too hectic, like it often does for many of us, we have these like brief moments where like, oh, I didn't bubble up today, and and I don't think anyone's perfect about all of this, right?
No,
And
not.
so we have to be, I think we have to be a little kinder to ourselves and a little more forgiving, I think.
Yeah.
Because I know I can be harsh on myself. Like if I miss a day of meditation or something, and I'm just like, you see, you're dropping the ball again. You can't stick to it. It's like when you quit piano lessons when you were 11, and it's just like, okay, we don't need to go down that path. Let's be a little kinder to ourselves. But it is one of these things too, where I think it is important for, to have these conversations and to reinforce them and to reach people who maybe haven't thought about them. And I've never heard of the Qigong, what is it? The closed
It's
energy?
called the energy closed position.
Energy closed position, which sounds great.
Yeah.
And it might just be, hey, I need to conserve right now because I have a really long day. Maybe I'm at a conference or something. Mm-hmm. Or, someone didn't get enough sleep the night before and they have a really long day at work ahead of them. They need to, just conserve a little bit to get through the day the best they can. These are great tips as opposed to maybe just guzzling another thermos of coffee.
Yeah, I think so much of it is about like feeling ourselves. So having our awareness attuned to our own self, which is actually the topic of the book I'm writing right now. So I'm writing book number 5, which is called Sacred Reparenting, and it's about inner child work.
Oh wow, okay, cool.
And what you just said about the piano lessons made me laugh because I'm like, oh, that's the inner child, inner critic dynamic, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. And I think like really being in a loving, compassionate relationship with ourselves is so important. And our spiritual hygiene and our, sometimes you don't need to meditate. Sometimes you just need to forget that and go have fun, or go play with your kids or do something. Like we're whole beings and we need to attend to all of us with loving kindness, energy management, boundaries, all of that is part of that. But I think it's about feeling yourself and making a choice in the moment. What are you a yes to and what are you a no to? So you might choose to give to somebody because you're a yes to that, or you might choose not to because today you're a no, and as we feel ourselves, we're really feeling what we need, what we want, what we have energy for. I think that ultimately that's like the best spiritual practice, maybe the only, that's what meditation does. That's what therapy does. That's what all healing modalities lead us to, is sort of a continual and direct experience with ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sometimes when I have conversation with someone like you, I'm just like, oh man, it's so easy. This is, I'm like, okay, we figured it out. Right.
Yeah. Good news about that is you can't do it wrong. Right.
Right.
Like even if you forgot, even if you fall off the wagon, you're like, oh, I haven't done that in days. I'm going to do it now. That's it. It's a practice. We don't have to get perfect. We just continue to come back to it.
Yeah, I was actually having this thought last night where it's always there for us. And I equate it to kind of like a feeling of, why I think a lot of people love quote unquote God so much. It doesn't matter if you're paying attention to God. Whenever you decide to pay attention, God is there for people. And I think there's comfort in knowing that. And also what you bring up makes me think about, with these boundaries that you can use technology one way or the other. It can drain you or it can shelter you. It's interesting because you think about people who, I guess, people who are considered to be flakes, and they never show up, or they say they're going to do something and they don't do it. And to me, it doesn't ring of a person who's just a bad person or a liar as much as someone who's not able to choose between the yes and the no, and hasn't found the plight or better ways to decline things in the moment because they feel obligated. Or, and I know, I can't speak on behalf of women, but I know that typically, I know in the world, women are encouraged to be more accommodating than men are. And so it's definitely probably more difficult for women to feel like they have to say no to certain things than for a man to be like, no, I'm not doing that. But when a woman says, no, I'm not doing that, they're like, oh, well, aren't you a type of woman? Uh-huh. Aren't
Yeah,
you a
for
special type?
sure. Yeah, it is hard. And I think it's really difficult for empathic men too. And I haven't seen a difference there. I don't believe that there are more empathic women than there are men. I think it's the same. You're an empath, doesn't matter what gender you are. And I think in a way it's harder for empathic men. They have their own unique challenges, I should say, which is that it's so often just society just rejects sensitivity in men, at least our what sort of Western culture, and we're growing up in my generation, it was like the macho, you're supposed to be like a macho kind of dude, and it's a hard path to take if you're really a sensitive guy. So that, I think it's a tough road. There's different challenges for whoever we are as sensitives, but I just always want to give a shout out to the sensitive men out there and say I know that that's a tough road.
Yeah, it's really funny
Yeah.
because when I was in college, I joined a fraternity with one of my best friends from high school. And we were actually called the sensitive movement. That's what our friends called us as a pejorative, like, oh, it's the sensitive movements here. Like they thought,
Ouch.
yeah, they were really burning us good. I've got Lisa Campion here. We are going to take one last break, and we're going to come back and we're going to get more into this. This has been a great chat so far. I know you're enjoying it as much as I am. So we're going to be right back with Lisa. Okay, we're back, and we're talking about we're talking about sensitives and sensitivity. And it is interesting to me in a world that obviously, at least to me, it doesn't reward the system of capitalism and like cutthroat marketplace and things like that. It's not a reward. Or you don't get rewarded for the behavior of, no, you go first, or no, I don't need more than I have, you please take some of mine, or no, I'd like to be more thoughtful about this, as opposed to just barreling ahead and at all costs. And I've noticed in the last 5 years, especially like a lot of the self-help books are like, be unfucking stoppable, or, and it's like, wow, this is like a really aggressive kind of energy coming at the self-help space, right? It seems it's like, wow, like the boot camp stuff, like don't stop, you're not, unless you're bleeding and sweating and crying, you're not making progress. And it's like, wow, I guess that's one way to look at it. And to me, that's like an outer, it's all like looking outward, and as opposed to, I think, the sensitive person, which I think everyone can tap into. It's more about the inward and making the inward change that is then reflected outward. And it seems like all of your books are focusing on transformation of a person and tapping into inherent power. So it's empowerment from within, which to me is really the key in moving forward, no matter what we're talking about in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for noticing that. And also, I have sort of a radical opinion about this, actually, Ryan, and that is, I believe that sensitive souls, empaths, healers, psychic types are sort of where we go to as we evolve spiritually, So the newbies that show up on the planet, new souls, tend to be a little more aggressive, like narcissistic. It's a lot of like, power, sex, and money, like give me more of that stuff. And then I think there's sort of a cost to that we then have to deal with sort of the karma of our bad behavior when we were new souls. And that's kind of our middle soul phase. And we kind of get very bogged down by difficulties. But I do think that time teaches us compassion. And I really feel like planet Earth is where like warrior spirits come to learn compassion and empathy. So as we age and we mature as souls here, we become more empathic. We become more like aware of like, well, I really, I can't impact you without impacting me. We are all part of a interconnected web of life that is, profoundly important. And that sometimes it needs to be considered as well as my own needs. I think when we first get here, we're like, it's all about me. And then as we grow, it's like, well, it's all about us. And that includes me too. So I want to just, again, shout out to the empaths and just remind us all that maybe if the empaths were in charge, would we have war? Would we have hunger? Would we have the problems that we're facing in the world right now? Or would we be finding different solutions to, the challenges that we're facing in, as humans right now?
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. And what gives me hope is in understanding that there are literally billions of us on the planet. And there's probably, if I had to guess, thousands. Now, how big that 1,000 is, whether it's a 5-digit number, 6-digit number, or 4-digit number, whatever, who are these, as the society, throws around the word psychopath a lot lately, but these are the people who, have accumulated such vast wealth and billions, so much more than a person ever could conceive of ever needing. Right. Which to me is, I think someday in the future we'll understand just how wild of a time it is when we look back and think, oh, so one person thought they should have billions or whatever it is, or even millions, right? And it's not different than like kings or queens who wanted, everything as well. It's just extrapolated and blasted out into a larger scale. But the idea that, the empath is going to be the one who topples the government, right? Or something like that. That's just that's not the MO of someone who's deeply connected and spiritual to be like, let's go, we're not going to defenestrate, like, throw people out of windows.
Viva la revolution, baby. That's what I say,
Right. And so and I do think there is real power in the numbers of people and the numbers of people who basically we understand we just want to have what we need to survive, to be a person on the planet. And, and that should be a right. And the war and all that kind of stuff has to stop. But empaths aren't the ones who are going to be like, okay, let's go get a bunch of rocket launchers and blow these people up. Right.
Right.
So there is okay, so is this the great problem of, of our spiritual future? Like the seemingly slow pace of true transformation. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I mean, it seems, if I had to guess, even though we just met today, I would guess that you have a pretty hopeful outlook for the future of humanity.
I do have a pretty hopeful outlook. And I do believe that there's a larger process going on here, which is there are more people on the planet than there have ever been. And that many of us are reaching levels of consciousness and, enlightenment and sensitivity and empathy that we've maybe never been on the planet before. And I really feel like it's sort of the 100th monkey scenario here. Like there's going to be a tipping point where enough of us reach that level of consciousness where we shift the, trajectory of the human species into a higher vibe, and I think we're there. I think that's what's going on. It's sort of, and I see it. And I know that for me, my contribution is to keep my own level of consciousness high, to keep working on my own inner state. That peace begins inside of me. Love begins inside of me. If I'm loving on myself and my family and just living in a state of love, that I'm adding to that light on the planet. And for me, helping other people reach those levels of consciousness is my contribution. You know what I mean? So I know that the outer world is a reflection of my inner state of consciousness. That's like a deep spiritual truth that I believe in deeply. And so I do think there's hope. I do. Either
Yeah.
that or aliens are going to land on the White House lawn and it'll be like Star Trek. Hopefully not Independence Day.
Yeah, right.
But,
I don't think we have to worry about the Independence Day one unfolding.
Yeah.
You know, I've just always thought that if you can travel through space time, you're past a lot of this other BS that some of these hard lessons that we're still learning. And I do love the idea of the 100th monkey. And, you know, at some point the tipping point will happen. And it is you know, and we all have a responsibility to ourselves, which is tied into each other. But going back to what we talked about at the very beginning too, we have to make sure we're not too hard on ourselves when we fail in these endeavors. We just have to make sure we get back up.
Yeah.
And having spiritual hygiene and knowing how to do some of these. I really love the idea of the empath's bubble being like a sponge and trying to visualize it hardening or having an extra layer for protection in those situations.
I feel like it's meant to be like semi-permeable, like a cell membrane, you know, it's not fully. I think if we go full on, you know, shield, we feel disconnected and isolated. And that what we want to do is be in charge of that. So the cell membrane allows in what the cell needs. So we can program the outside edge of our energy field to allow in energy that's supportive to us and to keep energy that's not supportive to us out. And that we are the boss of what comes in, you know, inside the bubble. That's a much more empowering state than I'm just at the mercy of all the negative juju that's rolling around the world right now.
Yeah. And you touched on it when you said doom scrolling, and people know it. And this is, I mean, everyone who has access to, you know, smartphone, modern day technology, the internet, cell service, these are very specific problems to people who are living in that world, as opposed to people who the last thing they're worried about is their Twitter followers because they're trying to figure out how to eat. Right. And I think sometimes we can forget that in the Western world, that, you know, our problems aren't the world's problems, and our problems do affect the world, unfortunately. But, you know, many people are at a different level of problem solving than we are.
Yeah.
And I think if the people who are able to influence the world in such a dramatic way, which we're seeing right now in the last week and a half, very specifically, when decisions that we make here, how they affect the world, if we can, you know, take it upon ourselves to, you know, maybe shoulder a little bit more responsibility when it comes to this. Not saying that I don't know if I actually believe what I just said just now, but because it feels like we're all in this together equally, right? But I do feel, you know, what's that old line, with great power comes great responsibility?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, what would you suggest for someone who needs to find a nicer way to say no? Because I feel like that's probably one of the very first fundamental steps in being able to protect your energy and, you know, keep your consciousness and your spiritual level in a place where it needs to be, right?
Totally. And what I did was I found like 5 go-to phrases that I practiced saying. I'm not kidding. I practiced saying them in the mirror, looking myself in the eye and smiling until I could say them without feeling bad about it.
I love this.
And my very very favorite is what my grandma taught me, and it's no thank you. And no thank you just solves a lot of problems, you know. I don't think we need to explain. I don't think we need to, and we can if we want to. Like I'd so love to help you right now, but I'm just so overbooked. So you know, I'll send prayers for your venture, but right now I have to give it a pass. So nice, right? Like, you know, if we can find ways to, you know, say no in ways that are that aren't like the I'm gonna kill you no kind of, you know, road rage. No, we don't need more of that, but just compassionate ways to say no, but are also firm. And I also think like we need to, it's not as simple as that. We need to be prepared to back up. So a boundary is just a request unless you're prepared to deliver the consequences of it. So to really think about like what the consequence if somebody violates your boundary, what's your backup plan? How are you going to then deal with that? We learn that as parents or we don't. I don't know, maybe we don't, but what are the consequences? We set the boundary and that we know there needs to be consequences. And I think that's sort of where our personal power comes from, is when we trust ourselves to deliver the consequences. And for empaths, that's hard because it's what I call the empath trap. Like, I'm going to say yes to you because I don't like the way I feel when you have a fit when I say no. You know what I mean? So there's kind of this, we have to, that's like a level of codependency that empaths really have to deal with, which is to figure out a way to handle, manage, tolerate the energy other people have when we say no. People don't like it when we say no, especially if it's new. They might have a fit. And that's okay. We have to let other people deal with their emotions, and when that's impacting us, we have to pull that cord. We have to like disconnect our well-being from other people's emotional state. And that's an important, you might need some therapy for that, but it's a good goal to have, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, and it's also being more self-aware of, our own reactions when people say no to us.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, an important aspect, a mirroring of all of this as well. Yeah, that is really the empath trap. I like that. And it is, one of the things I'll use, that I'll say, and I use it and I say it, using it has weird connotations for me. Like, I'm worried about, like, are people going to hear that and react badly to me saying the word use? So it's the exact same thing we're talking about, but I'll be like, no, I can't, I'm sorry, I can't do it. But and if it generally sounds like something I'm interested in, I'll be like, but I wish I could, please don't stop asking me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because at some point, and maybe ask me with more heads up in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And because people aren't used to, I know everyone has their own thing. People aren't used to me being scheduled. I'm kind of a pretty spontaneous person, and so scheduling sometimes for me feels kind of like I'm being trapped into stuff, but that's a whole nother thing that I talk to my therapist about. But, but I do love this idea of having things at the ready that speak our truth. They're not excuses, and we're not lying to people. We're actually just finding the right words for how we feel.
Yeah.
And what we need. And then the backing up part. Ooh, that's like masterclass, right?
Yes.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. So, because I'm not a parent, so I've never really had to reinforce with backups being like, and this is I have to tap into my dad energy, for some of this. But, Lisa, this has been really fun. This has been great. I really enjoyed our conversation. I want to let people know they can find you on Instagram. I believe it's Lisa, the letter X, Campion. That's Campion. I believe lisacampion.com is the website.
That's right. Yep.
There's a link tree where you can find all of the links. That's linktree / Lisa X Campion. 4 books, the 5th one being worked on currently, so that's really exciting. When do you think, I know these things are tenuous, but how far along are you in that process?
Chapter 2.
Oh, okay.
So it's new, so I just got the contract for it, but it'll be late 2026 or early 2027 for that one.
Rad. That's really cool. Yeah. That's really cool. Well, congrats on the previous 4 and Thanks. Also on the upcoming 5th. That's really cool. Because what was it? Reparenting
Sacred reparenting, spiritual and intuitive healing for your inner child.
Wow. Yes. Because you hear a lot about, like, you got to get that inner child. You got to be in contact. You got to be in touch. But, you don't often hear about, you got to let it play. You got to let it out, but it's like, okay, well, what if when you really get in touch with it, it comes out and screaming on an airplane, right? It's like, We need to know how to soothe it. That's really cool. Well, Lisa, thanks. Is there anything you want to leave everybody with, or something I left out that you want to make sure that they know how to find?
No, I just really want to thank you, Ryan, for having me on your podcast. I love your podcast and your work in general, and it was such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, this was really great. We have to have another chat, and maybe we'll do another one a little further along in the 5th book. I'd love to, boost the signal on that when that's coming out. And then it's funny too. I think maybe you need to write a book about the mistakes learned from paranormal investigating without a net, just going in blindly,
God.
right?
Yeah.
Which would be pretty fun. But yeah, that's because have you done one recently?
No, I quit doing them years ago, but I mean, I sort of do them unofficially because like Murphy's Law puts me in the haunted Airbnb every single time. So I have to just do it to get a good night's sleep. But I don't do it officially.
That's really funny. Yeah, I mean, you're moths to a flame and you're the flame. So Lisa, this has been great. Appreciate you. And go find Lisa, go find her books. Check out the website, give her the follow on social, check out the podcast episodes. A lot of great insight, and there's online classes, I believe, as well. So until next time.
Thanks so much.